right at 5:30.
Okay, it's 5:30, so good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Ottumwa City Council's work session. If everybody would rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Chris will take the roll.
Councilmember Hoffman.
Here.
Councilmember McIntyre.
Here.
Councilmember Cavanis.
Here.
Councilmember Basu.
Here.
Councilmember Galloway.
Here.
Mayor Johnson.
Here. The next item is to approve tonight's agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Yep, go ahead. Second.
Chris will take the roll.
Councilmember Hoffman.
Yes.
Councilmember McIntyre.
Yes.
Councilmember Cavanis.
Yes.
Councilmember Basu.
Yes.
Councilmember Galloway.
Yes.
The first item on our agenda tonight is to continue the discussion regarding the city's fire protection and prevention code and possible amendments to the 2021 International Fire Code. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Phil Rath, our city administrator, to lead us in that discussion.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor. Ooh, these are hot. Okay. It's not that much. So this is a topic that goes back to when the city had moved to the 2021 International Fire Code. Was about 2 years ago. And at that time, one of the things that, in addition to adopting that fire code, there was an amendment or exemption that was allowed that went away along with the adoption of this fire code. And there were a number of things that were notified of City Council when they were making that decision. I do not remember that amendment, the removal of that amendment being one of those. And since that time, basically what that amendment did, it allowed for some exemptions and some specifications within certain specifics with downtown buildings where sprinklers wouldn't necessarily be required if they were within compliance, and they made other arrangements for that. This has come up with a couple of buildings that were looking for renovation, and when they found out that the 2021 code required, and prior codes exactly as well, required the use of sprinklers, that became cost prohibitive for them in some of those cases. And it was, well, that wasn't needed before, that was the reason for that. And so that started a further discussion, and I believe it was in January of this year we had a work session and had talked a little bit more about this. At that time, there was a group of individuals, including staff and community members, that had gotten together and talked about options with development, with fire safety, and how to maybe come about that. From that January meeting, it was recommended that the interim fire chief and community development director get together and have a meeting and try to come up with some recommendations. So that kind of gets us to this point today, and I know both staff members have some recommendations that they prepared, and I understand there's some community members who wanted to speak as well. And so I guess I will turn that over to you and call up the individuals as you would see fit there.
Zach, did you have some comments you wanted to make?
Sure. So I'll try to be brief because I know we've had this discussion a couple of times. We have had some more that we've sort of learned as we've tried to develop, I guess just the sort of list of options or the approaches that we think the council could take. One is that I know several of you were able to listen into a presentation with, and even participate, I guess, for most of you, in a discussion with the West Des Moines Fire Department about a program that they had in Valley Junction. And I think that was a really great conversation. There were some things that came out of that meeting that I think are good long and medium term goals for us to have downtown that relate to shared sprinklers type systems, a main that can support several buildings on the block, and then that becomes more cost effective for the owners. You know, that took 12 years to get together in Valley Junction, so I do think that that's a longer term approach that would be something that we'd need to explore grant opportunities and other things around getting done. But I do think that long term, that's probably the best way of getting these buildings all having sprinkler systems downtown. And I do think that should be our goal, to put a feasible plan together for a direction where we can get all these buildings, at least have access for the owners to build out sprinkler systems. But in the short term, we have really seen, and I think you'll hear from some folks tonight, that it has been a barrier to development downtown, and it has stalled some of the progress that we've made having the fire code update. I think also there's a little bit of urgency to make a decision here, because we also need to make a building code update. We need to move from the 2015 International Building Code to a new building code. And right now, we have to hold off until we can understand, you know, how to line that building code up with what the council's goals are with sprinklers as well. So I do want to introduce a little bit of urgency on both the development side, but also practically speaking. It'd be great if we could come out of this meeting with direction on something to bring to the next or a future council meeting as far as an ordinance, or direction to at least say, you know, that we're done. The packet, when I put it together, we did kind of describe that there's 3 different approaches we can take. The first would be to make no change, to continue with the fire code as it is now, the requirement that sprinkler systems are used. I do think that even in the no change scenario, we need to probably put together some kind of better communication around what our willingness is to look at other types of accommodations. The existing building code does provide for some types of formulas that can be alternatives to using a sprinkler system. They're pretty complicated, and it would require building owners to get into building out kind of how these scoring matrices can work. But I think we should probably have some expectation that we can be formal and consistent about, even as we relate to that going forward. So that would, I don't think that's simply no change. That's just, you know, trying to do a better job communicating the code going forward as well. Option 2 would be to revert to the previous amendment exactly as it was. Speaking with the fire chief and kind of going through this process of coming to understand these systems, I think that in general, our preference for both of us would be not to do that, that we think that there would be at minimum a need for something more restrictive. And then option 3 would be to do something that is an amendment that is more restrictive. And I did propose some language going back to the April 16th agenda when we were supposed to have this meeting the first time. But since then, we also have looked at some language that was proposed by the National Trust that was a proposed amendment to the 21 Fire Code when that was done. And I think there's some interesting things we might be able to take from that as well. The Association for Preservation Technology prepared that, and they really looked at how to do the balancing test. And really what it is meant to be, you can even see in what they described there, it's really meant to take most of the most common design alternatives to sprinkler systems and to formalize it into an amendment that is more explicit. It would be, you know, around determining which buildings could be exempted and then what would be required for them. And so whether that's in the language that we proposed the first time, that language would have been that an automatic sprinkler system be installed in accordance with Section 903 through all buildings with a Group R occupancy except for R2 occupancies with no more than 2 stories in height above grade, having no more than having 3 or fewer dwellings, and where dwelling units are separated by 2-hour rated fire barrier, and where any penetrations to adjoining buildings use 2-hour rated fire doors, which comply with NFP 80 and use self-closing devices, smoke seals, and fire rated hinges. That was the language again from April 16th. The proposal that's also in your packet that we could look at, which would be the National Trust version, is in some ways more broad, but in some ways also incorporates some different language. It does say that for group A2M or R2 occupancies, A2 being assembly, which would generally be your restaurants, your bars, your theaters, possibly. M being mercantile, retail, or R2 being apartments. So for group A2M or R2 occupancies can be rehabilitated without an automatic sprinkler system if the following conditions are met. The building is less than 4 stories in height above grade plane with less than 3,000 square feet per floor. Group A2 and M occupancies are only located on the first floor. Group R2 are only located on the upper floors. Type 3B construction is used, which is your masonry construction with the wood joists between the floors. There's 2 exits per floor. Vertical openings have 2-hour resistance rated, and fire resistance rated separations in accordance with the building code are used, and this would again be similar to what we described in the First Amendment. And then compliance with Section 907 of the International Building Code, and especially Item 4, Section 105, 1.2 of existing building code, which is basically that conditions determined by the code official to be unsafe shall be remedied. And so that provides a little bit of case-by-case addressing of particularly unsafe things, which, for example, could be those penetrations between buildings and the need for fire doors or things like that. This also does have some language that relates to any occupancy other than A2, M, or R2, which could be your more intensive assembly type uses, anything that's, you know, custom manufacturing downtown, or something that presents a higher fire risk, which is still permitted. And that would just be that in addition to those requirements, the carbon monoxide detection in accordance with 915 is provided, that a fire alarm with manual pull stations, full coverage smoke detection, occupant notification, and emergency lighting is used. So these would be over and above what was described before, but for higher fire hazards, there would be those as well. And in general, I do like the way that this amendment incorporates those different uses and things like that. So this is just speaking for me, and I think the fire chief will speak a little bit on his perspective, but I do think that there's some need to look at an amendment. I do think that there'd be some benefit to, as I say, in the short and medium term, having this barrier removed. I think it is a pretty significant barrier to keeping on pace with our downtown redevelopment. And that going forward, we need to look at the ways that we can do a shared system block by block, and I think that'll be a pretty significant undertaking. The final thing that I'll say, and I'll wrap up, is that downtown Ottumwa and our redevelopment that we've done over the last 10 years, 15 years has been significant. It's been the largest source of value increase for this community. And that's not the only thing we should be considered about. Absolutely, it's a critical test to balance between, you know, safety and all the other things that come with development. But for our community, that redevelopment results in a lot of benefits as well that relate directly to safety. It relates to our ability to fund critical services. It relates to more eyes on the street, more safety and security for people in occupied, vibrant downtowns as opposed to where we were before. And so I think that there's a lot of things that go into that. And the analogy I kind of come back to a lot is that you can build an airplane out of everything. You can build the entire airplane out of the material you use for the black box, and it will never crash, but it will also be too heavy to take off. And so there's absolutely a balancing test that goes down to, you know, how do we provide the absolute safest environment we can while still having a vibrant environment that generates value, that generates quality of life, and that keeps us on track for the goals that we have throughout the rest of the community. And so looking at all those things, I do come down in favor of some version of an amendment. I think that the National Trust version is really good. I'd say that probably the most difference there really is that they did describe 4 floors or less. You know, we might want to have a conversation around whether we want to go back to no more than 2 floors. But in general, I'd say otherwise the language in the National Trust version that's in your packet is pretty good for what I would say I recommend. So, thank you.
Does council have any questions for Zach at this time?
Has the city talked with any of the downtown merchants who own buildings that would be in requested compliance?
Yeah, we have quite a few of those conversations. Last week even we looked with a retailer that's looking to expand into a second storefront, and for him this was a concern. He's holding off on moving that project forward until he knows the outcome of this conversation. And then, there's also been projects where we've, along with the fire department, had to enforce the requirement. For example, the Capitol Lofts project is a recent one where the sprinkler requirement was triggered for that project, and it ended up being expense above what was anticipated, and it's been they've really come out behind on budget for that project because of that requirement. They've definitely voiced that concern pretty loudly as well. So there's a variety of those conversations we have.
And do we have any diagram area that tells us the area we're interested in working in? And is there something on the south side of town as well as downtown?
And I do think that's important to talk about. So the language that we've provided for either amendment is not location specific, it's specific to types of buildings. So Church Street buildings would be treated the same as buildings downtown. Even there's a couple of two-story, very similar to downtown style buildings that go up Court Street. Those buildings would also be treated the same way in this code. And it really is about the type of building and the nature of the building. It has to be pre-existing, it has to be, you know, within that certain size, that type of construction, and the types of uses that we're looking at.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Zach at this
Well,
time?
I was just gonna state, there's also been businesses that have, not ended up, like, have started projects and had to stop or pulled out of projects because of the, change.
Yeah, and I think Fred will be able to talk about that a little bit, because there's definitely even conversations that don't get to us before they kind of get lost. And there's a lot of opportunities that are waiting, or that haven't happened, or folks that have been frustrated and have been really challenged by the change.
Anything else for Zach at this time before we bring up another person? Okay, thanks, Zach. Next, interim chief, fire chief Pat Short.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Obviously, there's been lots of discussion over this code change. I was not anywhere near when the code was changed. In moving forward with it, obviously I'm aware of the economic issues, and I have a lot of sympathy for that, but I have to look at things primarily from a safety fact. In doing so, I've contacted all of our sister cities throughout the state of Iowa, seen what code they're using, whether or not they allow exceptions. There's only 3 of them in the state of Iowa besides us right now that are using the 2021 code. 2 of them have no exceptions. One has an exception if you have access all the way around the buildings and there's no protrusions going through the buildings. Other than that, most of the cities do not have any
Can't close that
exceptions.
door.
You have to leave one of them open.
Sorry.
Some of the other factors that I have to look at is what we have as far as our response capabilities with our department. In looking at that, went down and I've looked at all sides of the buildings. With cars parked along that street, the way it's designed and set up, the Tower 1, which is what I would use on the main street, takes 20.5 feet of width to get the outriggers down to be able to use it to full extent. The area between the cars is 21.7 feet. Does not give me a lot of room to work to get around things. I cannot get an apparatus in the alley. It's too tight. So my other apparatus has to go to the end of the alley, closest to where the fire would be, and everything has to be hand laid, all hand ladders, all tools taken from that point down to the fire. They have to run both trucks off of separate hydrants, off of separate streets, due to the flow of water. The amount of time that it would take for us to make entry into that building gets us to the point of where the minimum standards are for what the floor collapse time is, which puts my personnel in great harm. Not to mention the fact that if anybody is stuck in those apartments, it takes us that much time to be able to set everything up, the extra time to set everything up, to be able to make a rescue in those buildings. Along with that, and in doing the report, or the information gathering for this, I started looking to see the difference between sprinkled buildings and unsprinkled buildings. The fire deaths and injuries to civilians with sprinkled buildings are reduced by 89%. Firefighter injuries are lowered by 60%. Property loss are 85% less in these buildings. 96% of the fires are contained to the point of origin. of where the fire started. I think it's important to realize that when a sprinkler goes off, it doesn't send them all off, it's the head that is needed. More heads don't go off unless the fire is expanded. There are enough factors as far as the difference in the safety that I cannot support an amendment to do without the sprinklers. Another part of thing to be concerned about is if you have a fire in those buildings and you're looking at continuous buildings, if you have the sprinklers, it's confined to that building. Whereas if you don't, the smoke, whether you have the smoke stops or not, with all the work you're doing, the time it's taking, you're gonna be going to buildings beside to make the stops. It's going to do more damage to other people's property instead of just the building that had the fire. There are some serious factors with structural integrity. The more that fire cooks, the hotter the building gets, it can cause structural issues within the building, causing collapse. That, once again, instead of just the one building, you're affecting that one and the ones connecting to it. Even after the fire is over, due to the amount of water that is needed in fighting a fire to this level, you're going to have potential problems with the foundation, where that also could lead to collapse, or dealing with compromising the integrity of the foundation. Researching everything, I also found, along with bringing in Chief Wetzel from West Des Moines, looking for other angles and options, because I understand there's an economic aspect to this. I am not considering that. I understand that's a factor for everybody. That was why he was brought in, to try to find ways to make it cheaper. There's also a fire sprinkler tax incentive that I found, that it's section 179 of the U.S. Internal Revenue Service, that will allow small businesses to write off the full cost of a commercial sprinkler system up to $1.04 million.
What was it, 179 of what?
It's in the packet that I gave you too,
Yeah.
Cara. It's section 179. So that's a lot of information to throw out. As of right now, I can tell you, I don't see any way that I can support an amendment that would take the sprinklers out. So if there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
I know every community is different, but when you talk to those communities that have adopted the 2021 fire code, did they talk at all to you about the adverse impact they felt they had on economic development in their community because of that fire sprinkler requirement?
No, for the most part, they said a lot of what Chief Wetzel's talked about with the different grant programs, running different, the water mains, the larger water mains, and so forth. It may have at times been a little stymied, but in the end, all their areas that have grown, the businesses ended up in there, and everything worked out well for them.
Does council have any questions for Pat?
Do you have any history of Ottumwa's area that you're talking about? What their history has been in the last 3 to 5 years, as far as fires or problems that you had a major problem in dealing with?
I've not had a downtown fire, especially in the time since I've been in this seat. I don't remember the last time I had a downtown fire, quite honestly, which is good. Knock on wood, I hope it stays that way.
2014,
What was it?
2014.
Okay,
Right, yeah.
so. Brody Cottage was one, yes, and that was a total loss of that building.
So interim chief Short is, we haven't had a fire since 2014. So does that mean it's predictable? No,
No.
it doesn't mean it's
No, it
predictable.
is
There could be
absolutely
a
not
fire
predictable.
tonight. So, I've researched that too, and using packs like that, it is awesome. that we haven't had a fire down there, and that is because of the vigilance of the business owners and the people down there. However, that shouldn't be used as a form to predict, you know, hey, oh, we're not gonna have trouble for the next 10 years. So, when you talk about, fire containment, when you have to run a hose that many feet, let's say you're in the middle of the block by Spuds and Pouring, how many minutes does it add to run hose from the end? And when you have to run that much hose, because there are 50-foot sections and 100-foot sections. So if you have to run 300-foot, let's just say 1.5-inch hose at 120 pounds of pressure, what's the margin of error that hose could fail when you got that many sections tied together? The margin of error is about 50%, isn't it?
Yeah.
So could that margin of error, that 50%, could that harm firefighters that are inside trying to fight that structure fire?
Anytime you're reducing the amount of water that they're able to get to them, yes.
Right, and then you have your other engine that you talked about not having enough feet in the front. So can you get full use out of that truck since you can't really stabilize it? And how safe is it to work around that truck?
What we'd have to do is it's something called short jacking, which when you have to pull in the outriggers, every time you do, it limits the distance that you're able to reach or maneuver.
So when you have to stop and figure all that out and you have to put those out, does that take extra time to figure out where this is at and where you're gonna place it as opposed to pulling up, putting them out and
Yes.
going? Okay, thank you.
What about the south side of the community, Church Street as an example? I can't remember, well, I guess the last thing I remember was that there was a second level veranda on a bar over there that caught fire and had to be
Yep.
extinguished.
Yes.
Other than that, I don't remember anything on the south side.
On the Church Street area, that's the only one that I can remember. There was significant damage to that structure,
Yep,
and it was shut down for I don't know how many months over that.
okay, thank you.
So you've talked a lot about the positive aspects of fire sprinklers. What are some of the positive aspects of other fire preventative care for buildings, like inspections and other additives to a building in order to make it more safe in case of a fire?
Well, obviously, I think, you know, you have to have continual inspections. I know Zach's department does inspections on all these businesses throughout the year. I think they go hand in hand, but one doesn't replace the other.
How would you say they compare?
I think one builds off the other. The inspection is to make sure everything is done correctly, making sure it's being maintained. The sprinkler and the alarm systems are there to make sure that you're safe, and they're after they've been made sure that they're working properly.
And maybe just a more clarifying question. So fire sprinklers versus other things that you would, besides inspections, like added firewalls and things like that, how does that compare to fire sprinkler systems in preventing a fire?
I don't think they're nearly as efficient. I think, obviously, and it's also in the packet, NFPA has done 4-year studies over fires throughout the country, and that's all the statistics I gave you came from the NFPA. They've shown tremendous amount of difference in life safety. Another factor that they had that I have not mentioned is since with the sprinklers being used in the capacity that we're talking, there's never been multiple deaths, period, with the sprinklers being used properly.
Chief, are there both wet and dry systems
Yes,
that
there
are
are.
used?
Yes.
Obviously, a wet requires water, a dry system is what?
Right, they both use water. It just depends on the climate you're in as to what you're using. So the water doesn't freeze in the line. It's held back by pressure, like pressurized air. And then when it's needed, then it flows through the piping.
Okay, another question that I have, and I don't know if you have the answer, but what type of water line is needed to feed the average building that's sprinkled?
That's all back to one of the things Zach said. There's equations that go into all that.
Right?
There's no set. It depends on the square footage. It depends on the elevation. It depends on different factors. So I can't tell you what size main that would be.
Okay, well, 50 years ago, I built a building on Gateway Drive, and it had 12,500 square feet.
Mhm.
Required a 6-inch water main to feed it. It was a wet system.
Okay.
And I don't think there's that kind of water downtown in the area that we're looking at, or that I'm looking at. They would have to put complete new water lines in order to accomplish adequate water to a system.
Well, and to kind of add to that too, Keith, it's not just water mains in the downtown district, it's water mains all across city limits, which does complicate things a little bit more than just one district of our
And
community.
you gotta have a line that feeds it, that's right.
What is so let's talk about renovated buildings, compared to non-renovated buildings and the risks of fires. So like abandoned buildings.
We have fires in abandoned homes a lot throughout the town. Abandoned buildings, I can't say we've had a lot of them. Is the potential there? Sure. It goes back to, like I said, with the inspectors going through the businesses, making sure everything's maintained, everything's up to code. Absolutely, that helps to lessen the chance of a fire.
And also just a quick look on the tax incentive too. It does look like this is a great program. It has started to phase out after 2022. So if there are businesses that are listening, you should look at this quickly because it is phasing out. So I guess I have another question too. So I guess, and maybe you don't know this because you weren't in the interim chief position at that part, but what major event happened to cause the fire department to not offer the amendment again? Do you know?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I was made aware of it basically after being in this position
Yeah.
when all this came up. So no, I don't know what led to that.
Okay.
I have no idea.
And then when we sat down, you and I and some other community members sat down for a meeting, and I think Assistant Chief was there.
Deputy Chief
Deputy
Cronin,
Chief,
yes.
yep, Cronin, thank you. Anyways, we sat down, and in that meeting, it felt pretty hopeful that there was some light at the end of the tunnel, and some of the things that the two of you had pointed out were, and I think to Cyan's point, were points of egress, having I think 2 or more, firewalls. I think there were also, I can't remember what they're called, the fire alarm police things. So some
Good
of those
illustration though.
were, a lot of that was identified as ways that, and we were very specific, because I want to clarify something too. None of us up here who are talking about it, no one in the crowd, no one who has sent emails regarding the sprinkler system wants anything, like, safety is a priority for everyone, and like Zach identified too, that, as we grow our community too, we also have to look at balancing safety and growth too. So I just want to clarify that before I go on. But anyways, a lot of that stuff was talked about as other ways to continue to move forward, while also looking for programs, or to design programs like some other communities have done regarding grants for sprinkler system. So I guess my question is, what changed from, kind of looking at those items too and saying, okay, there are ways that we can move forward, again, not past like so many apartments in a building, or 2 stories was our focus. Once it got over 2 stories, we all identified that there was a need for that too. So I guess what changed in kind of that interim?
The research.
Okay.
And because when we had that meeting, I found out about the amendment and the change to it, and I understood the hardship. But in researching everything and moving forward with everything, the more I found out, the more it concerned me.
Okay.
Like I said, it's safety is, and yes, I understand it's for everybody. I don't think anybody here doesn't want people to be safe. I'm not trying to.
Yeah, no, I just
Point
wanted to make
fingers
sure it
there.
was clear to, just people that aren't in the meeting can't feel kind of the energy too,
Sure.
because I think there's a point to that too.
Sure.
So,
But in researching it and seeing, with the codes, when you have the International Fire Code, it doesn't say the maximum, it says the minimum standard that you're supposed to follow. And then in talking to the different fire chiefs, fire marshals, deputy chiefs, inspectors, it was overwhelming, the same type of message.
Okay.
So just everything I've gathered, all the information, like I said, this has not been an hour's worth of information yet. This has been weeks and more of constant gathering of information. It's been going out and seeking out every avenue possible. That's why we also looked at and found like the tax code thing and Wetzel's proposal. We're also trying to look for avenues to help with the other side of things. But at the end of the day, seeing where I have to park my vehicles, what it's gonna take to get inside, the time frame of everything, what it does to the buildings, and a big part of it is that fire is going to affect not one business without sprinklers, it's gonna affect more. With the sprinklers, it is 96% by NFPA's findings. It is maintained to that one business, so it's not affecting the others. So, I mean, there's not just one factor, there's a lot of factors that went into this.
And then my final question for now, let's be honest, I'll have more questions later as more people
No.
talk. I know, it's crazy. So kind of doing some of my own research too, and I know that the fire code for 2024 has not been presented yet, because there's still some changes and amendments. But it's my understanding too that there's some amendments regarding sprinklers.
I actually pulled up the 2024 fire
Okay.
codes today.
Yeah, so do you know what some of those amended changes are?
There are none of those amendment changes in the most current
Okay,
for the 2024.
for the one that's so past the kind of,
With the historical buildings and, no.
okay, okay.
And it's one of the things that, the building code and the fire code are not the same thing. They work together. Fire codes are, sprinklers are the backbone.
Okay.
To know that they would ever lessen, I would be astonished.
Okay.
So I don't see them, and I could be wrong, but I
No, I was
don't
just
see them
asking if you
lessening.
had seen some of those.
Matter of fact, I could see them getting more stringent, quite honestly.
Cause I think some of those are like for houses too.
Yes.
And so, I guess that's a question too, so as we start to talk about fire codes and we talk about amendments, so like I said, some of those, sprinkler systems would be required in
The
larger
residential ones,
houses.
that is a different conversation.
Yeah,
I've looked into it some, obviously my focus has been the commercial
yeah.
buildings.
So, okay.
There is a lot of things that have been changed with the residential ones throughout the communities in Iowa. Most of them say that the home has to be anywhere from, I've seen 5,000 or 6,000 square feet or above to require the sprinklers.
Okay.
So there have been
Okay.
stuff that have been adapted for that.
Perfect. Thank you.
I've got a question that probably is kind of a follow-up to Councilman Cavanaugh's question earlier.
Yep.
Have you had an opportunity at all to talk to Tim Albert at Ottumwa Water and Hydro to even see what his feelings are about whether there even be adequate water supply downtown or on Church Street and stuff if the 2021 standards were left in
No,
place?
I have not.
And everybody had to start putting in fire sprinkler systems?
No, I have not. But there's another avenue that, I've got one call into one of the sprinkler companies of, sometimes you can get pumps that will help with the flow of water to increase it to the buildings. And that might be an option too.
Interim Chief Short, could you get with Tim tomorrow? I don't wanna misquote Tim, but I think Councilman Cavanagh there was some new stuff ran downtown and a lot of that might be ready for some services. And then, you know, to follow up what Carr says, I appreciate what what she said. However, I want everybody to know as well, if those of us that fall on the side of the sprinkler or are still deciding, that doesn't mean we don't care about the growth of downtown either, because the growth of downtown means a great deal to me. And there is not one person in this room or in this project that I think doesn't care about safety or life. I think we all care about safety or life, and we all care about growth. So, you know, that's a touchy situation, but I do have just a couple more questions and then I'll stop. I think maybe Doug had one or two. The 2-hour firewalls we bring up, does the 2-hour firewalls so if you have 3 buildings connected, the 2-hour firewalls protect these 2, not the people trapped in this one, correct?
If you're inside that room, no.
Right.
That's what I'm saying, so it's protecting other businesses. And when we talk about occupation and abandonment, if the building is occupied and somebody says, hey, there's a fire, that only raises the percentage of safe evacuation, what, 2 or 3%? It doesn't, where a sprinkler would raise it 70, 80%.
Yeah, I can't tell you what the
And then
percentage
what
would be for that.
It's a high percentage of, sometimes the sprinkler, when the sprinkler protects other people's businesses on the sides, where there could be a case where if you had to get to a fire, the businesses on the side could suffer more damage than the one in the middle that had the actual
Well,
fire because of your access, correct?
Yeah, that's one of the points I was trying to make, that with sprinklers, it contains it to the one point of origin.
Right, so there may be a time where you had to access through somebody else's building to get through this building, where they may sustain more smoke and water damage than the actual building with the fire.
I would say that there would be a good chance of, a lot of the times, if you have a fire in one of the buildings, we're going to write off the loss of at least one more beside it because of what it takes to get to it in the amount of time.
Right, okay, and
So
then,
yes, it could affect more than one
and then my
building or
last,
business.
well, like she said, maybe not my last question right now. What about, and this is just a question, if you were gonna look at, I don't wanna use the word compromise, if you were gonna, say you were gonna look at a plan that allowed new people to build, where they agreed to get the financing and get their sprinkler as they build or soon after they build, or get a grace period, because we both know that's a financial investment, would you be open to that?
Are we talking the commercial or the residential?
Like we go to somebody, Zach buys a commercial building and he wants to renovate it, he wants to put a business downtown. He has the money to start the business, however, he has to seek financing or grants for the sprinkler system. Would you be open to a grace period so he could get that? Like say 6 months or whatever, a year,
I
whatever.
think there'd be the process of, and there's a whole lot of hypothetical there. Before it would open, before there could be residents living in the living quarters, I would say it would have to be in there.
Okay. Thank you.
Doug, did you have any questions?
Not at this time, I don't know.
Is there any good questions from council for interim fire chief?
Yes, please. Is the, what used to be known as the Hoffman Building, is it sprinkled, do you know?
Yes,
And what about the Ottumwa Hotel?
yes.
Really?
How up to code are those sprinklers in the hotel?
I would have to go back and look at the sheet. I don't have those in front of me. I'm going to guess that they're up to code, but I don't have that information in front of me, Zach.
The coverage on the hotel will need some work when they do the, or at least if the proposed remodeling happens, they'll have to sprinkle some additional areas. There's no sprinklers, I think, in the basement. There's a couple of spaces that are not conditioned.
That is also one of the things, that it's a change of occupancy. So for what it is now and to change is what triggers those changes.
But it also, I mean, even with the amendment or the option 3, it would have to be sprinkled anyways, because it's over the, like,
Right.
3 levels or 4 apartments.
Any other questions for interim fire chief Short? Before we have the citizens come up and speak?
I'll let the public speak.
Yeah.
I'll back off.
I might have some more.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next, I'd like to have Mark Rowe from GoPip come up.
Hi.
Hello.
So I'd just like to start off with a quote from a very, very well-known author in economic development that says, "Creating vacant buildings creates the future of your community." And I think that there is a duality in this conversation tonight, that we're not hearing the entire story, we're hearing a side of it, and there is the other side that exists as well. What if someone dies in a fire from a vacant building that we created as a community? Because of those two arguments really are not mutually exclusive. We can disagree with topics, which I think that there is some healthy disagreement here, but we can still find a solution that works for everybody. First thought, though, I would really like to say that I don't think that we would be here tonight It had not been for the disinformation that was given to the city council 2 years ago in the transition from the 2015 International Fire Code to the 2021 IFC. City council specifically asked the prior administration of the fire department, are there any significant changes? And we were succinctly told no. Well, that wasn't accurate then. It isn't accurate now. That change completely eliminated the downtown exemptions that were in place. And in prior public meetings on this topic, reasonable solutions were brought to the table, as you all pointed out. There were safe options that were brought to the table. So, and they also somewhat mirrored, with a couple of clear exceptions, what those prior exemptions were. I'm really kind of confused on how we're still sitting here talking about this now. But since we are talking about safety on one side of the coin, let's talk about safety on the other side of the coin. And I did some research as well, and I will echo everything that Interim Chief Short said in the instances of safety with the addition of sprinklers. But I would also like to say that according to the National Fire Protection Association, more firefighters are actually injured in vacant buildings than any other structure fire. Additionally, according to the NFPA, there's a significantly higher risk to both the building and neighboring buildings if it's vacant than if it were occupied, regardless of whether there was a sprinkler system or not. I think it's important to remember that humans live in adjacent buildings to some of the vacant buildings that we have downtown, and we're doing a disservice to them by allowing vacant buildings to exist downtown. The solution that was offered in a public meeting that we had with the historic West Des Moines, is that right? West Des Moines with the historic Valley Junction, it was innovative, it was appreciated, at least by me it was. But Historic Valley Junction was listed as a Great Places community, which Ottumwa is not. What that means is they have access to a funding stream that Ottumwa does not. Historic Valley Junction, the community, owned a building to mask the infrastructure. Ottumwa does not. Further, Historic Valley Junction planned, that's the important thing right there. The Historic Valley Junction planned to this change to meet the needs of the community, and Ottumwa did not. So while those measures spawned growth there, I think I said it during that meeting as well, while it spawned growth there, it has hampered growth here. At least 2 downtown buildings, one in arguably the most prominent location in downtown Ottumwa, immediately stopped repairs as a result of this. And I'll bring up the 800-pound gorilla, which I think Zach and the chief brought up. These are tax dollars in the community. These are sales tax dollars in the community. These are payroll tax dollars in the community that would not be realized if these buildings were to remain vacant. Fire safety, public safety is not something that isn't paramount to everybody that's in this conversation. I think we can agree on that. It's not about the money. But there is a financial burden that, and a safety offset in this decision here. I'll be clear, the solutions, we've heard it online plenty, it isn't that we only care about the money. That couldn't be further from the truth. People are living downtown, and vacant buildings are inherently dangerous. All of the national statistics state that. They are more dangerous than occupied buildings, regardless of the condition that those occupied buildings are in. And I'm no expert, obviously, but statistically speaking, the change in code did not mitigate fire risk. It likely increased it as a result of forcing the vacancy of some of these building downtowns that were on the road to recovery until that fire code was changed. Finally, if we're going to talk about comparable cities, let's look at the full picture. We got the honor of getting that full picture with Historic Valley Junction, but we saw other comparable cities that were just given what the fire codes were. What public support was offered to those property owners in their repairs to get those up to snuff? Was there an offset that was offered by the cities that those codes were presented from? And bringing it back home, is Ottumwa willing to do that same thing? If we're not, I would suggest that that might be a problem, and that we might be saying we want vacant buildings to remain downtown and on Church Street and on North Court Street and any other place where there's historic buildings. There are several solutions which can be exempted in the Ottumwa Fire Code. We've been talking about one of them, so I won't, a couple of options, so I won't bring those up. But NFPA 914, which matches historic preservation and provides equivalent levels of protection, is one of them. Other examples include NFPA 1, NFPA 101, and NFPA 5000. So all of these have similar language, which Ottumwa already has offered in the option number 3. And some of these had some of those that were in place prior to the 2021 IFC adoption. We all want small business to thrive, especially in our downtown district. We've rebuilt, we've rejuvenated something that was basically dead 10 years ago. Many buildings were already slated for destruction, but we had people that came in and invested their hard-earned dollars. We had the city of Ottumwa that spent taxpayer dollars reinvesting to make it a better community. Today, more than 200 people call downtown home. These property owners invested heavily in their buildings, and they want a vibrant downtown. They want a vibrant Ottumwa. I'm sure that safety is a paramount concern to each and every one of those people that are living downtown, each and every one of those property owners, and each and every one of those businesses. We ask them to invest in our community. We ask them to live in our community. But this code says that they need to invest more to be a part of our community, not go with the status quo, which is clearly out of reach for several of those people. None of them want a vacant building simply because they can't afford to do it. And I guess I've rambled enough, but I will leave you with one thing, a challenge. I'm asking you not to be the only city council in the 21st century that wants to halt progress on our downtown and our business community.
Does council have any questions for Mark?
No, I just got a comment. You presented well, Mark, but I don't agree with that at the end when you're talking about, because now we're blaming empty buildings that have been empty for 50 or 60 years. Long before the vote on the 2021 fire code. They've been empty for years and years and years. So I would like to know the answer of why that was going on.
Well, actually, that's not accurate, Councilman McIntyre. The building that I said was in the most prominent location in the community is the Bridgeview City Appliance, or Bridge City Appliance, which has only been vacant for a few years now, and that was in the process of being remodeled until they were told that they had to bring in a fire sprinkler system, which halted the progress of that building.
You know, and one comment I would like to make is, Mark, I do say this with all due respect, you know, that I feel like your last statement there, if there's those of us that are thinking about sprinklers or concerned about safety and growth, I feel like you kind of are making us the bad guy. I mean, because I may want sprinkler, you're telling me, don't be the only city council that halts progress. I don't want to halt progress. That was never my intention. Just because I want to hear the safety side and consider it does not mean that I don't care about safety. And I think whoever speaks, let's not make the other side the bad guy. We all care about safety. We all care about growth. There has to be a compromise. This is a big subject. So the need to be right, we need to shoot it right out that door right now. And we need to be willing to meet in the middle. I am for sprinklers, however, I'm willing to discuss. I am willing to hear those compromises, and I don't think any of you are the enemy. I think you're our partners. We're all partners. It doesn't matter city council, it doesn't matter downtown Ottumwa, we're all in this together. And until we stop doing this to each other, we're not gonna get any further.
I agree.
Well, to clarify what you said, I absolutely agree with what you said, and I said in the beginning
I
that
say it with respect.
there is a duality in this conversation, and I don't believe that anybody is wrong and anybody is right. I do believe what I see, though, and what I see is progress is being halted. That was the point of what I was saying.
So I have a comment. So I keep hearing compromise and compromise. So I look at these options and I think there's some compromise, but you know what I think that is not on here is, let's say we look at like option 3 where we have a more restrictive amendment while we're looking at programs to be able to install sprinkler systems in the businesses that need it. Why aren't we talking about a temporary amendment of, hey, we're going to consider this amendment, but we're also going to commit to ensuring that we have sprinklers and new development in our historic buildings and work together?
I asked that question, that's one of the compromises I wanted to discuss. Isn't that what I asked Pat, is if you would be, we could discuss that? About if somebody invested and there would be a compromise for them to get financing?
Well, I'm talking about, like, why aren't we talking about, because, I mean, Valley Junction too, the thing that, we haven't said is it took years, 10, I think, and maybe Fred, or 12. Maybe Fred will talk more about this, Fred Sessinger with Main Street, when we give him the chance to speak, but, it took 12 years to get to the point that they are. And, I think there's, but we've done a lot of our construction, and we don't have 12, well, I mean, we do, but if we don't come together to look at a way to compromise and move forward where we can get to our ultimate goal, because I think that's our ultimate goal, is sprinklers in the buildings that require them, and, you know, heck, maybe in the buildings that don't, if we have a great enough plan. But we also have to do something in the interim. And I don't mean just like a temporary until businesses are open, but something that we can do in the interim of those, you know, I would hope maybe 5 years or something to get a plan. 2 years would be great. So that's what I'm saying.
See, I think one of the things when we're talking about this, it seems that we're talking about sprinklers or no sprinklers. And that amendment that was subsequently ripped away when 2021 was passed and adopted, that was somewhat of a compromise. That was saying, okay, well, in lieu of sprinklers, in certain circumstances, on a case-by-case basis, these other things may be
Yeah.
amendments that could be done to still provide for some amount of safety there. The historic Valley Junction option, I think that is something that is an ideal model. One of the things that was nice about that was it limited the amounts of point of access. So
Correct.
aside from, if we got a business that is going to develop right now on the Main Street area that was redone 5 years ago, I think it was completed, unless lines were put in for fire service, for sprinklers, we're gonna be ripping that street up for
Correct.
every single building. The historic Valley Junction, at least, it had multiple buildings in one point of access. So it would limit the amounts of access that would need to be done. So aside from the cost of whoever wants to develop, anyone that wants to put in sprinklers for any of their buildings, you'd have to also rip up the street. And so I think that's another cost, aside from whatever it's gonna cost the individual, to have the street ripped up and tore up. And I think it was, Main Street was right in front of the radio station. It had to be ripped up for some other issue. And it was not long after the construction, and it's like, anytime you rip up a street, there's that cost on the psychological standpoint as well. So I think, yes, long-term plan, I think the sprinkled buildings are probably the best, safest option, but there's also a way to get there, and I think if that's a long-term goal, what can we do in the short term to not limit or prohibit some of that progress?
Well, and I agree,
Is
and
there-
that's what I was trying to say too, is that, again, you're right. It's like, it feels like a black and white, and we're trying to not make it, I want people to understand that it shouldn't be black and white. It's a interim to develop a program, because I feel like I've heard Zach and his department state multiple times that they want to work with the fire department on how to make this program and research other programs, like Interim Chief Pat Short had told us, to bring those to Ottumwa so that we can be successful. But that's gonna take time, it's gonna take resources, and we're going to have to invest in our community to get that done. But at the same time, we need money coming in, and having kind of an interim amendment assists with that too. And I just think that, so I guess that's what I'm trying to say, is that I'm hoping that we're all kind of looking at this as a interim and then hoping and guiding Zach and the fire department to create a program. So, yes.
Yeah, and staff, to their credit, has, they're coming at it from
Yeah,
different angles,
exactly.
different perspectives, but they have worked well together to, it's been cordial, it's been civil, and they've worked to try to get to this. And I think they both will agree to some aspects of both sides of this.
Yeah.
Is there any other questions for Mark at this point?
No, I agree. I have a comment. I agree with Phil Rath when if we try to, I think we're all on that same page. We're trying to find, okay, can we do something temporarily now to get the progress start going again, but knowing in the future, this is what ultimately was gonna happen. But if everybody would agree to that, then we know that sprinkler systems are gonna cost a lot more money, and you're still gonna tear up the streets when it's time to go do that. So, as you would say, kicking the can down the road. It's not really kicking the can down the road, but it's something that they need to know ahead of time that, hey, if we come up with something like this and we're still protected and feel safe, why the process is being done, but they know ultimately.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, going back to the conversation about Historic Valley Junction and maybe some of the other communities, they were in a different position than we are now. You know, they were in the process of rebuilding their downtown districts, so they didn't have the issue because they were already going to be tearing up their streets. So they didn't have the issue of, hey, we got, you know, 3-4-year-old streets that would be knocking out to take care of this project. They had a building that they didn't have to procure, so they didn't have ugly pipe work all over the place. So, but they did have to pay to remodel that building, so to speak, so they could actually put that pipe work in there, so it would be hidden from public purview. They also had state grant money that was available to them. So there were a lot of things in place just because of where they were at that point in time that we're not at that juncture. We're so far past that at this point. So, you know, to me, my personal opinion, we're looking at a situation where if we're in a situation where we're going to require this downtown, then we're saying, hey, we're going to potentially waste taxpayer money because we're going to be ripping up these beautiful streets that weren't in a position where they had to be ripped up before. Are we going to have that same ugly pipe work that Historic Valley Junction had in our downtown district, or is the city going to purchase a building or a property that they can hide that pipe work in? Are we going to apply for grants that could take a long time to move the needle forward for us so we can actually get that, which is going to stall progress even further? So you're right, those temporary accommodations, or, you know, a permanent accommodation, whatever that looks like, that is something that we need to discuss. But just to say, no, we're not going to do it, I don't believe is the right answer, because that is, quite honestly, in my opinion, a disservice to the property owners downtown. It's a disservice to the people that are living downtown, and it's a disservice to the taxpayers, quite honestly, because that is prolonging the pain of growth for them on the tax base perspective.
Well, and you know, I agree with you, Mark, on the, you know, and Pat, I appreciate you putting the Valley Junction thing together. Here's what I get from the Valley Junction thing. Mark is correct when he said that is a completely different environment with, you know, they can get money from everywhere. However, what I take from that is they had to kind of plan. The planning part we talk about, they had to look at different ways to do things. So what I take from Valley Junction is the motivation to look for those different things, the motivation to, hey, can we do this? Can we try this? Can we compromise here? Can we do this? Can we start here? So, you know, like I said, I really mean it has to be a partnership. And, you know, just one last time and I'll shut up, but I know we all agree with growth and safety. So we just need to get right in that middle. But the Valley Junction was a very good motivation to look for different ways of doing things. I mean, so that's the motivation. We need to look at different ways of doing things, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah, real quick, one of the things I took away from that was they had a plan in place, they knew where they wanted to be, and then they got everybody else to buy into it.
Right.
And that's the thing is, we haven't gotten to that point where everyone's buying into it yet. So we're behind the 8 ball on that side of it. If that's the goal we want to have, is all these sprinkle buildings, that's a very admirable goal. Again, what do we do in that interim? Is it, we're gonna require it, so anyone new is just gonna have to, you know, follow suit? Or do we find some accommodation in between?
But I agree with what Mark said. I don't think the business people are not buying into the concept of a sprinkler system. It's just they can't afford it. And unless there's gonna be grants available or something in the future to help with that, it's gonna be a big burden for those people to be able to come up with that money to put in sprinkler systems. I think they buy into the concept. It's just a matter of we're a lot poorer community than Valley Junction is. And you have to take that into account. Mm-hmm. Is there any other questions from council for Mark before we ask Mr. Zeziger to come up? Okay,
Thank you.
thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Fred, you want to come up?
Tough act to follow there, Fred.
So, I guess the big point is, 5 of you get to make the decision. You know, it's your 5 people's votes to make the decision. To your point, we are there. We work together downtown on a daily basis, and we have. We can overcome hurdles if we have to. 12-inch water line running down the middle of the street. 3-story buildings were told that they needed to put a sprinkler line in. So several of those opted to do that. The 2-story buildings didn't say anything to them because we were all told it wasn't an issue. $6 million straight, $3 million from, that you guys voted on, not you, but your previous counterparts. Keith, I think you were on the Waterworks board. I think they put in $1 million, and I think Legacy put in $2 million into that project. So $6 million project. Property owners didn't really pay much of any of that. But it's beautiful. We love it. The town loves it. It would be a shame to see it tore up every 20 feet to put in water lines. Talk to Valley Junction. They have 5 phases. They've done 3. The last 2 phases from the conversation I had today are dead in the water, done. The 3 phases they have done cover 26 buildings. 26 buildings, 3 phases of properties. We have, let me get this because I did a little research today. And of those 26 buildings, 7 of them have really taken advantage of it and put in upper story stuff. Out of those 26 buildings, the last, what do you say, 12 years? Mm-hmm. We have 136 buildings downtown in my Main Street district, which is 16 square blocks. Steve's Main Street district is 5 square blocks. And 2.5 are within those 5 phases. Of those 136 buildings in our Main Street district, 23 of those are 1-story buildings. 83 of those are 2-story buildings. 30 of those are 3 stories or more. So we already know that those have to be sprinkled, and property owners all know that too. I'm not concerned about those. I'm concerned about the 2-story buildings. And the reason I'm concerned about those is with the 2-story building, you're looking at a footprint for a building that's probably 20 feet by 100 feet on the first floor. The second floors are usually between 60 and 80 feet deep, which is about enough room for 1 apartment, 1 2-bedroom apartment. Think of that as a single-family home. There are firewalls on both sides, and I can speak to the fires downtown too. We've had several fires downtown. It seems like that happened in the 40s a lot. So when they really started happening, like between 40 and 1960, there were a ton of fires, ton of them. We had a lot of 3-story buildings. A lot of them are now 2-story buildings. One of those just got renovated into the Capri Lofts. The theater next to that burned. It was torn down. That building remained standing, all 3 stories. They opted to take that top floor off because it wasn't being used and they didn't see any use in having it used again. Same thing happened at the other end of the block when May's Drugs burned down. It wasn't May Drug, it was Hill's Drug.
Tim, could I interrupt you?
Yep.
Could you get a little closer to the microphone?
Yep.
Because I can't hear over the piano.
I understand. Hill's Drug burned down in 1960.
Is there another door we can open? besides that
Catching the
one?
building next door on that, which was JB Sachs at the time, it burned. But there were 2 3-story buildings next to that, and took the top floors off those as well. I guess my point is, just because a building catches on fire, 117, 119 is another example, has had 3 fires. It's still there, the buildings around it are still there. Thanks to our great fire department.
Go closer, Tim, Fred.
Let me get back to the buildings. So back to our 83 buildings. 45 of those have second floor uses. They are occupied. 28 of those 45 are apartments. And the other 17 are either office or retail spaces, but they're completely occupied. And to your point of they were empty before, they weren't. They were empty in 2006. We have filled several buildings downtown. And, you know, when someone comes to me and asks about a building, I tell them, you've got to look at about $200 a square foot to fix that building up. That's a lot. It's a lot. When you bring a water line in from the middle of the street for a sprinkler system, which is a 6-inch line usually, at a minimum, you're looking at between $7,000 and $10,000 to get it in from the street into your building. And then anywhere from, you know, I don't know from that point, but a lot. So that's extra cost on that. So there is a lot of gap financing that has to take place in these projects. And I guess listening to the fire chief about where he can put his trucks, if an alley is an issue that he can't put a truck there, well, I would say that would be a good place to start with multiple buildings. And we really have 2 blocks downtown where that's a problem. You have the 100 block and the 200 block, and the 200 block's a little bit iffy because you got Canteen Alley, which is pretty wide, and you have the parking garage there. But the 200 block of East Main, you have every place else. You have a giant parking lot behind it. That's not an issue to get in the alley of those buildings.
Have to kill a bunch of flowers to get down Main Street.
Yep. Maybe. I mean, when the fire happened at 214, I was there that night, and the fire department held that off for quite a while. And I don't know if anybody was ever in the bridal shop, but it was absolutely packed with dresses. Packed with dresses. And, you know, I think that maybe was a code violation in itself, but that would have been where I think that fire happened. The other thing is that when I think of the fires that have happened, it's usually electrical, space heaters, things like that. When we redo a building, we're redoing all of that. We're putting in fire alarms into these buildings that are direct wired into the electrical system and have a battery backup. If we need to, we put in fire alarms. We have very efficient, up-to-date furnaces and air conditioners. You know, so everything is brought up to date, usually within the whole building. It's not just the apartment, you know, because a lot of them are being done all at the same time. I just wanted to do a comparison here because I got on this a little bit today. So we have, out of those, all those 2-story buildings, out of the 83 2-story buildings, 45 are completely occupied, 38 have second floors that are unoccupied, 38. So I just did a quick little comparison of combined values, taxable valuations. On 20 of the buildings that are completely occupied, second floor has an apartment or an office or retail space upstairs, and then has an office or retail downstairs. The combined value equals $4,078,643, which is an average per building of $203,932.15. I did 20 buildings that had the second floors empty, that were comparable in size. I didn't skew these, and I've got addresses here. I can give this to Chris afterwards. Those 20 buildings equal evaluation was $1,165,860, which came to an average of $58,293, which kind of blew me away because I've been telling people that if you put an apartment or something upstairs that doubles the value, that's 3.5 times more. Having something in that second floor. 3.9. And if you look at a 2-story building, it's only going to have 1 apartment. I want everybody to be safe. We do 2-hour separate. We've done that for the last few years. You know, we bring fire doors in, so many feet to the street from a bedroom, 2 means of egress from a bedroom, second exit out the back. We've even done second staircases if we've had to. We've made these buildings very, very safe. I just want you to think about that. There are currently 122 apartments downtown in 33 buildings. We have 136 buildings. There are over 200 people that live downtown, and of those 33 buildings, 6 of those are sprinkled, and they're the ones that are over 3 stories, or have. You asked the question if the Hoffman building was sprinkled. It's kind of interesting, because when they did that to get it to pencil, the first 3 floors are not. The second 3 floors are. So it was the residential sprinkler system that was put in on the top 3 floors. The bottom 3 floors are not. And that was a process of working with everybody to make sure that that project went through. And penetrations between the floors had to be fire caulked. There's no penetrations between those floors. There was extra strength put on the doors for fire. You know, each one of those apartments is 2 hours. So if a fire starts in one of those, there's an apartment there that, you know, we've got to get out, but there's a fire alarm that gets everybody out of the building. And believe me, I've woken up to that at 2 or 3 in the morning when it goes off, because it comes to our house. And we all get up. Anyway, I just want you to think about that, and I have these numbers, and that's all I have to say. Questions?
Tim, something that's of interest, I think, to most people is that before I left the waterworks, average day, we were making and using 1 million gallons a day. We have 3 large reserve tanks in the city. But you have got to have, at that time, 5 million gallons set aside for fire in case we had one. And so, you know, you can have a 3 million gallon tank and a 2 million gallon tank and end up using all the water just to fight a fire.
Yeah. I can tell you 2 stories of being downtown, one during streetscape, one during a winter, which I think is valid in this situation too, but I don't know who keeps bad records, but somebody keeps bad records.
Not Chris.
There was a water line in 117, 119 that no one knew was there, and it was a 2-inch line that came into the building, and it was really cold, and one of those really icy, frigid moments that we had, it broke. No one knew it broke. It filled up 117, 119, 115, 113, and 111's basements before anybody noticed that that line was broken.
And that's not usable water.
Overnight.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
then also during streetscape, we had the water line uncovered in the 300 block, which was, I think they replaced it with a 12-inch line, but I think it was a 12-inch line. I tried to keep that piece, but it was way too heavy. The middle of the night, it was uncovered, and just having it uncovered, to tell you how bad those lines were, it blew a hole in it about this big around, about a 5-inch hole in it, down. It dug a hole 20 feet deep underneath the water line and filled up the north side of that block, every basement, within a few minutes. I can't remember. They said they knew it broke because whatever they have at the waterworks said, we're losing pressure fast. And it was like 50,000 gallons a second or something like that. It was crazy.
Yeah, it is.
So, but I do wonder, you know, I like the idea of sprinklers, especially in taller buildings. When you have multiple units, I think that's a great idea. So if I was going to do that, I would say let's look at a block that has lots of 3-story buildings, or the block where there's an alley and it's hard to access that from all sides. I think that's going to take a number of years to do. I think it's probably doable. I did talk to Steve today up in Valley Junction. I think he would be willing to give us a tour if we wanted to go up there. That Main Street program does pay the insurance, they pay for the inspections, they collect the money from the property owners, which every property owner pays $40 a month, which I think is a little crazy, but if that's what they have to do, that's what they have to do. I think the reason that it has died is because they've had, while that line is there, they've had very few people hook up to it. So there's no mandate to say you have to hook up to this. It runs through their building. but they have to pay for that extra build out from that point out. And they've only got 7 buildings that have taken advantage of it for the second floors. So, but that was all paid for through grant money, those 3 phases they did. And the last phase, phase 3, was just into the Main Street office. So it is a big enough line to do that whole block, but nobody else is. It's only comes into that building, and it can feed the north and this building to the south, but they haven't taken advantage of that, so.
All right, thank you, that's very informational.
Thanks, Red.
Thanks.
Fred, thanks for all this research.
Is there any other person in the audience that wants to speak on this topic? I only had these 2 papers.
Josh Giddings. I was at the meeting in January, I think it was, and I had kind of thrown together a letter of my thoughts that I was going to share with the council, but I didn't at the meeting, and the mayor multiple times asked people if there was anybody in the audience that wanted to come up and speak, and like waited and waited, and I felt like I missed that opportunity, and so I thought tonight I will come up and speak. And I'm, so pleased with the points that have been brought up by everybody that's spoken already tonight. I don't know that I have a lot to add to that, except maybe, well, Fred's also a property owner, but from the perspective of a property owner, our family has owned property in the downtown area for since the 80s. And my brothers and I are carrying on that legacy, and we do so proudly. And we always try to have very safe places for our tenants. That is a goal of ours. And when I moved back to Ottumwa in 2000 to open my business, my bike shop business, my goal in moving back to the community was to see it become a better community and to do everything that I could to see that happen. And I've done a lot, but I've also been pleased with so many other people that have been a part of it, and it's just been great. That said, our downtown still struggles with filling buildings. Apartments are doing well, but your first floor retail places are still struggling. And it's very tough to compete with the internet, very tough to compete with further growth, happening on the outskirts of the city that's drawing traffic away from our downtown. So I'm trying to think of ways, how do we reinvent downtown to make it a place that can continue to flourish. And apartments is one of those things. And with the sprinkler system cost, and I know points have been brought up about grants and that sort of thing to mitigate the cost. We have a building that we're hoping to completely redo in the 200 block. It needs everything. It needs all new electrical, all new furnaces and everything. We're hopefully getting the back wall brick face put on it here in the next couple of weeks. The contractor finally got back to me. So that's going to be another improvement to that building. But the interior needs everything. And I mean, we're probably looking at, I wouldn't be surprised if it was $100,000 per floor on a 2-story building. Sprinkler systems, I heard numbers batted around, but I would say probably $100,000 range. So I think for some property owners, the incentive is to you want to recoup that cost within a certain amount of time, and about the only way to do that is to cram more apartments into a certain amount of space in order to bump up your revenue numbers to bring that cost back sooner. And so I guess one thing that I think about is if the incentive becomes cramming more apartments into a smaller space, then does that create safety issues? So you're kind of incentivizing maybe a more dangerous option than, fewer apartments in that same amount of space. But fewer apartments means less revenue, and then the costs kind of go out of control. The other thing that I would like to see, myself, I have my business on Main Street. I live in the upper story of the adjacent building, which we also own. But in those ideas of remaking downtown, I would like to think that, again, with retail kind of going to the internet, is there an opportunity for craftsmen, something like that, to come into our downtown where they would have their business on the first floor and they live upstairs? And don't we recall that happening years ago in downtowns? You had your owners occupying the second floors. So is that an opportunity that we can, encourage? But I think if somebody's looking at opening a business or moving their business to our downtown and living above the space as their home, again, you're looking at maybe $100,000 costs on the first floor, maybe $100,000 costs on the second floor, and then add $100,000 for a sprinkler system. And then are you going to have a $300,000 building when that's over with of value? Maybe you are, maybe you aren't. But I think for an entrepreneur, that extra cost is going to make that less likely to happen. Fred and Carolyn Jenkins are an example of somebody who has done that. I see an opportunity for some of our buildings, vacant ones or not, for that. But again, appreciating the safety factors, and again, we always look for safety in our projects, and the other points that have been made. So I don't know that I'm adding a whole lot to the discussion, other than just maybe some other things to consider. And again, always looking for that compromise that is going to be the best possible solution for everyone. So I guess that's it. Any questions for me?
No, I just have a comment. Hey, I just want to thank you for your comments, and just to add, this does mean a lot because I have a great deal of respect for you. We talked when I was running, we spoke before. You are a red-blooded Ottumwan through and through, so I do appreciate that, and I appreciate you getting up and speaking and giving us this information from a different perspective. Thank you.
I don't want to cry, but just my parents, what they did for the community, we're trying to keep that going. And I love Ottumwa. A lot of people will bash Ottumwa, but then if you go to other communities, people bash their communities too. So, it happens everywhere. And I don't think people really, number one, appreciate the great community that Ottumwa is. Number two, understand that the struggles that we have here are the same struggles that are going on everywhere else. So,
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Thank you, John.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak on the fire code tonight before we move on to our next agenda item?
I'd like to say one last thing, if I could, please.
Sure.
I just want to make it very clear, the Valley Junction thing, I understand we're not West Des Moines. The whole idea was just the concept, because there's lots of communities, they're not doing it verbatim, they're using it as a model. The other part, I know we have some great business owners downtown. Mr. Gettings, I actually rented off your family 100 years ago. He was a fantastic landlord. I know the job that they're doing downtown with when redoing the businesses. They're doing a great job. But every time I hear the more and more people that are in the apartment, which is fantastic, it also tells me all it takes is once. And I know from what I've seen after 23 years in this business, that if you have one person that does something, how it can affect so many more. So that's where I go back to the safety factor. I understand the constraints, but I am sticking to exactly what I said. And although I understand the financial aspects, I still think it's the way to go.
Thank you.
Mayor, sorry. Well, I was just gonna say, that, you know, we've had a couple meetings on this now, maybe 3 or 4. And so I would like to see us move forward with a vote. I know we can't do that today, so, you know, at our next meeting next week, I would love to see this come to the agenda. I would like to see option 3 with direction to, Zach Simonson's and, the fire department's, department to continue to work on a long-term plan to, bring sprinklers.
Sure.
I promise I'll go fast. I just want to say 2 things. The first is that I have really appreciated the conversation. I've appreciated this opportunity to get to work with Chief Short, especially. You know, people say interim or whatever. I've been in an interim job before, so if he makes a mistake, he makes a chief-sized mistake. So I just, you know, call him Chief. And I've really appreciated getting to work with him on this. Some of the meetings on this have been in some ways the least comfortable just because I don't, you know, enjoy being on a different side of a position or an issue like this with one of my peers. So I appreciate getting to work together on this. One thing that I think is kind of the most important thing to take away from the things that we've heard is, you know, the fire code, the building code, they're kind of written with an imaginary brand new building in mind. And buildings that are already existing have a lot of baggage and a lot of complicated features that go with them. And this isn't just buildings that already exist. They live in an ecosystem and an environment downtown that isn't starting out new. When Fred talks about how many buildings are occupied and how many are vacant, we don't have the occupied block and the vacant block. We have the vacancies right next to some of the most successful businesses in town. And, you know, we're already pretty far along, and we're creating a standard that's going to be so difficult for people where this building next door, because it got a certain amount of a head start, it doesn't ever have sprinklers, and whatever fire happens there, sprinklers are not a question. But your building next door that you're trying to get just up to par with your neighbor, the cost burden is so much different, and the realities are so much harder. So I do really think that because of the situation with existing buildings, because of how complicated the environment is, I do think that, you know, some kind of longer planned out approach that is comprehensive and it is good, and I think that's something we need to continue to work on. Our downtown's a lot more difficult than other towns. We don't have a square, we have just a massive downtown, and that's a challenge. But I think the folks that are working on this are working in the right direction. Council, I think it would be good to get direction. I think Councilwoman Galloway has already kind of indicated, at least for one person's perspective, but I do think we probably need to get some direction to just, you know, move into some way of getting this wrapped up, get it to a vote, and get it settled so that folks know what the environment is going forward. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Zach.
I would add one thing to that, just real quick. This is probably a really good point. And that's the building condition, but, you know, and construction methods. You have buildings that are steel and concrete frame buildings, like the Hoffman Building and the Hotel Ottumwa. And then you have a lot of the banks were just solid brick buildings or had concrete floors in between them as well. And then you have the ones that have the brick firewalls that are usually three bricks thick that go up above the roof line to keep the fire from spreading from building to building. If those brick walls are in good shape, they do a great job. If they're got penetrations through them or holes through them or the brickwork's bad, they don't do such a great job. So, I mean, there's all kinds of things to look at when you're looking at no two buildings are exactly the same.
What's the average age of the buildings down there? I know they're old. I mean, just a rough estimate.
I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of them from the 1880s. I would say a majority of them, but the 1920s was huge too. There was anywhere from 1890 to 1930. There was still a lot of new, construction going on, or tearing a building down and replacing it, or even putting a new facade on it. So you really don't know how old the building is until you get into it.
Probably thousands of different construction laws.
Oh, absolutely.
With just our downtown that went by in time.
Yep. You see studs that are, 8 inches on center to 15 inches on center, that are true 2x4s or even 3 inches thick in some.
Thanks, Fred.
Just maybe offer a recommendation here. I agree, I mean, it's kind of set up here to give direction for staff, and if we want to have something to come to a vote, if the council wants to go with the current status quo, which is to maintain the 2021 fire code with requiring the sprinklers, that's status quo. So, I mean, if we present something as an alternative, like option 3 has suggested, and it comes to an up-down vote, if that amendment is approved, then that's the direction we go. If it fails, then essentially you're saying at status quo, and
Correct.
so I think maybe that's a direction, if I can offer that.
Yes.
All right, so maybe, I don't know if it's maybe for the next meeting, maybe the meeting after that, but in a very near meeting, we'll bring a recommendation of an amendment, mirroring something probably like option 3 here, and put it to a vote, and let you decide, and you still had another, at least a week, if not 3 weeks, to ask questions of staff, to do any more research, and then make a vote on that. Is that?
Is that
Yeah.
acceptable to council?
Yes.
Okay. The next item on our agenda for our work session tonight is legalizing the use of golf carts on city streets as identified in chapters 23 and 26 of the City of Ottumwa Code, ordinance number 3211-2023, establishing regulations applicable to the use of utility terrain vehicles. Phil, are you gonna start the discussion on this?
Yeah, and I know we've got, I mean, I don't think he filled out a slip, but I see Jerry's in the audience. He brought this before city council's attention at I think it was the May 21st meeting, and had some suggestions as far as wanting to include golf carts for use on city streets within compliance of state law. There's some things as far as under state law, you know, the operation is between sunrise, sunset. City council does have it within its purview to adopt local requirements to allow golf carts on city streets if it would decide to do that, and can require certain modifications or requirements of these vehicles. So basically, state law says that you can allow those. They cannot operate on city highways. They can cross the highway, but they can't operate. So take, was it 149? They wouldn't be able to operate on 149, but could cross it to get from one side of the street to the other. You'd have to have a licensed driver, et cetera. And any other requirements that the city council would like to have as far as an ordinance, if you would like to go down that path, you could institute and offer up there. And I know there's a couple of examples out there as far as communities that do offer this. You know, so I guess question maybe to ask is this something that city council would like to entertain? And if so, are there certain requirements or regulations you'd like to see put into, it would require a change in the ordinance, and then we'd bring that before if desired, and I don't know if you wanna.
I just have a point of clarification first. So you identified that they would, golf carts would not be allowed on like highways, like 149. But I guess when I read the ordinance, it says it shall not be, or through the legislator, not be operated upon a city street, which is a primary road extension through the city. So I guess when I read that, I question, does that mean like North Court, Pennsylvania, like
Which ordinance?
321.247, golf cart operation on city streets. It's on number 2 in our packet.
My understanding was UTVs can operate in a 35-mile-an-hour zone. Golf carts can only operate in a 25-mile-per-hour zone.
Yeah, so that, but right here it says primary road extension through the city, so that's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
So that would, to me, that would be like North Court, that would be like, I mean, things like
You,
that.
you can designate the streets that are eligible for use within the city. So if that is something you wanted to follow, you could.
Oskaloosa does, in their code, say specific streets.
Yeah.
And I printed a bunch of these off if you'd like them.
Yeah.
I read it.
You can take 'em.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, so the ordinance that we passed before was for UTVs,
No,
utility
I know,
terrain
I'm not
vehicles.
looking at the city, I'm looking at the state legislature.
Oh, state law, okay,
Yeah,
I'm
the
sorry.
state law. So,
Yeah.
I understand that we can appoint city, or we can appoint the streets and stuff, but I'm asking a point of clarification regarding the state,
Okay,
so.
When they say primary road extension, that's a state highway.
Okay, that's what I was asking.
Not
Yeah, okay, perfect.
Jerry will make copies of that for everybody.
Okay,
Okay.
yes, I didn't want to kill too many trees.
No, that's fine.
Thanks, Phil.
I didn't have enough trees
Wait,
to kill them.
okay, sorry, I'm sorry, Phil was giving clarification, so I don't know if anyone heard that, so. 'cause-
yeah, that's what I was saying as far as the highways,
So that's what I just wanted, that
Yep.
clarification, but I wanted to make sure everyone heard that clarification. Thank
Yes, so there isn't a lot in state code, as you can see, about golf carts in general. But that is one of the things. So it cannot operate on a city street that's part of a primary road extension, meaning a highway like 149 or 34. It can be allowed to cross that street, and I've seen some of the code, it says it is close to a 90-degree, axis as possible, et cetera. Golf carts need to be equipped with a slow-moving vehicle sign and a bicycle safety flag. Operate on the streets only from sunrise to sunset. Golf carts operate on city streets shall be equipped with adequate brakes and shall meet any other safety requirements imposed by the governing body. Golf carts are not subject to registration provisions of the state chapter. Person convicted of a violation of the section is guilty of a simple misdemeanor. Okay, so that'd be under state code. For the city to adopt that, or to allow for those, like I said, we'd need to revise our ordinance to allow for golf carts if desired. You could add in any additional provisions outside of the state code that you wanted to, so it can be more restrictive but not less restrictive. There was a question that Councilman Hoffman had asked me previously about fee, and I did get clarification on that. We cannot charge for UTVs or ATVs, however, golf carts is not under that. So we could charge a permitting fee if we wanted to, if the council saw fit. You could require that it needs to be inspected, it needs to have proof of insurance, different things that you could do if that's a path you want to go down. And so I guess that's, like I said, the question is, when we look at this, is there a problem that we're trying to solve? Is this something that we're looking to do, and does it create additional problems? Just general questions from policy standpoint. Enforcement, how do we enforce those things? That's just kind of some general conversation, and we'll turn it over to you, Mayor. And
Jerry, did you have anything else you want to say?
I included some of the permit forms I could find online. A lot of communities, you went to the police department to fill it out, or the sheriff's department, whatever, was designated. But the ones I did find, like Bondurant, Grinnell, Knoxville, Pleasant Hill, some of the bigger cities, I did find their permit fees, I included in that packet.
Okay.
That way, at least some guidelines to look at.
Jerry, are
Yes,
their
sir.
fees rather nominal, or are they,
Anywhere from $5 to $100 for 2 years.
hello?
Pleasant Hill, they are $100. It's a 2-year permit. Most of them are $5 a year. I mean, very minimal. Again, they all have their own little quirks that they require, insurance, form of insurance, license, like I said, I'm not gonna read the law to you because it's all in there, but every community basically uses the state guidelines and adds a little bit to it. Basically, it's all about safety, don't go out and get killed, it looks bad.
so to answer the question about the fees, the city cannot charge more than what it takes to issue the permit. So the staff time, whatever it takes to do that. If it's a half-hour review by the police officer to issue that permit, it'd be, no more than a half hour of their time at wage and benefit.
I know in Pleasant Hill, they're fighting that $100 for a 2-year
saying it's
thing.
excessive?
They said it was very excessive.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, like $5 to $25 is more of the guidelines across the state, you know, for the, you know, I'm trying to compare cities, you know, bigger cities, not, you know, Agency, Eldon, you know, I mean, that's, you know, they're in their own little
Jerry,
entity.
what's the requirement as far as age of the person that can operate it and
12.
that kind of stuff?
Possessing a valid driver's license,
12 through 17 must have and display an education certificate. 12 through 15 must have direct supervision of an adult, but then 16 and above have to have that driver's license.
Is it something, Bill, could we add that it had to be a licensed driver instead of a permitted with an adult? I mean, is that a condition we could put?
Yeah, yeah, I mean, in the city council, if you wanna allow that, like I said, unless the state code says something specific, you couldn't go less than that, but, but yeah, you could require more than that.
Agency is minimum of 16 years of age, you know, with a valid operator's license. Like I said, I can go through here and read them all to you, but I'm not gonna bore you with that.
And I think
Karen, I think the thing that you were reading was referencing snowmobiles, not golf carts.
Well, and
I think you
ATVs.
have to be 16 to operate a golf cart.
Yes, and like I said, other communities, you know, proof of insurance.
Right,
You know,
right.
my insurance is $5.70 a month, you know, and that includes, you know, pretty healthy insurance, you know.
What are
It's pretty reasonable.
what are the safety features of a golf cart?
It's all over the board. I mean, I brought mine tonight. If you want to go out in the parking lot after the meeting, you can see it. You know, mine will meet standards, today's standards.
You
of
didn't
what-
drive it here, did you?
Yes. No. Just kidding there.
You flew it here.
Somebody said, you just need to drive it. And I said, sure, like getting your driver's license, driving your car to get your driver's
Have a
license.
police officer right
Yeah.
there.
And the sad part, I can't outrun him either. That's the problem. The trouble is, most people have a misconception of the golf cart that Grandpa had out behind the barn, that we go spend the summer there and get the dumb thing out, you know, right around the barn lot, you know, and it's smoke and, you know, golf carts today are totally different. I mean, mine's got headlights, horns, turn signals, brake lights, got nice stereo system. I mean, rear view mirror. I mean, it's, like I said, it would meet any community in Iowa's standards today. And like I said, a lot of people's misconception of a golf cart is, like I said, you know, we go to Grandpa's house in the summertime, you know, Grandpa get things started, we'd run around the backyard with it for a while and, you know, that's.
But depending on what the requirements would be that
Yes.
the council would put in
Yes.
place, you would still have some of those people that have the older golf carts that
That
might
would have
not
to meet the
comply with
standards.
those requirements.
Yes,
So if
that
we
would
said
have to meet the requirements.
Seatbelts, would a
And
majority of golf carts meet that expectation?
some communities, not in Iowa, no, I've found none in Iowa that require seatbelts because of the low speed of a golf cart.
So the reason I ask that is because annually 18,000 injuries happen with golf carts. That's more than, so pretty significant. And usually it happens when they turn, you know, because golf carts aren't to turn sharply.
And
so-
significant, most of them, or not significant, a lot of them were actually on golf courses, because I found the same website today that you
Yeah,
found.
the National Library of Medicine.
Yes, I can't remember what it was,
Yeah,
but
and
I
so-
did a lot of research today on, and you gotta remember, a lot of them on the golf course, alcohol was involved,
Yeah.
you know, on the golf course,
Some of them on
so.
streets,
Well, when you're
alcohol could be
turning on
involved,
it,
correct?
too, that makes-
Some of them on streets,
live in a
alcohol
totally
could be
Yeah,
different-
they're
No, I
gonna
know,
be,
that's what I'm saying.
you know, it's gonna be,
And some of our rates.
unfortunately, you know, I'm not gonna get into the UTV thing, but it, you know,
Yeah.
we can, how many accidents unfortunately with the UTVs across the nation too?
Yeah.
635.
Uh,
Sorry, I knew that too, because I looked it
Yeah,
up
sure.
too also.
And I mean, like I said, I'm not talking UTVs,
No, I
I'm
get
here
you.
for golf carts
Yeah.
only.
No,
You
I
know,
get you.
we're not gonna go down that rabbit hole with UTVs, that's not what I'm here for, you know.
I know I've talked to a couple of you, council members and asked my thoughts on this, and I've shared with you. I've got some concerns about, you know, if the city of Ottumwa is the best place for golf carts or not. But that, I'm not in a position to make that decision. That's a policy decision of all of you. I will say that from looking at various options, and I'm assuming Pleasant Hill is in the packets that you handed out?
Yes, it's
Okay.
in that packet.
And it's one that you handed to me before. I'd say of the various ones I've looked at, Pleasant Hill aside from the fee cost there, which probably is excessive.
It is good.
It seems to be the most thorough as far as if we're looking to adopt something, if that is a direction you want to go, I think that's a great place to start. As far as it talks about, it mirrors the parts of the state code that it needs to.
They
And
identify specific streets too, don't they?
yeah, there are some that they do identify as specific streets. I think most of those are the primary road extensions. But if there's other areas, aside from speed limit, so you could say anything 25 miles per hour and less, or 30 miles per hour and less, or whatever the number is you want to use, that's going to have its own limitation there as far as posted speed. But you could also highlight if there's any other streets that would be of concern. I like they've got the rules of operation, and one of my concerns and why I'd mention this is where I think where they can work is high pedestrian areas where vehicular traffic is already slowed to 20, 15 mile per hour. And we don't have a lot of streets like that. But in here in the operations, it talks about yielding to traffic, driving in the most, as far as you can be over safely to the right of the roadway, pulling over if there's a lot of cars, starting to back up traffic. And I think those things are definitely, if you've got drivers that are being conscientious of the road and sharing the road, same as bicyclists.
Yep.
I think that it could work, so.
Can I,
Go-
sorry,
go
I was
ahead.
just gonna ask, so, just because I get, complaints all the time about, UTVs, just like zipping around,
Sure.
and obviously golf carts can't do that. So when you envision like golf carts in Ottumwa, what does that look like to you? Like, is it going from like all the way on the north side to get groceries, or like, what does that look like?
That's gonna be a hard question to answer, because my golf cart's electric.
Okay.
Okay, so there's no noise, so again, I'm limited to the distance I'm going to travel. I probably not gonna go to Menards, I live on the north side, I live out, Bryan Road. I'm probably not going to go to Menards with it, We lost Hy-Vee unfortunately, so, but it's more, on Bryan Road, we have the UTVs doing their little poker runs all the time, and more power to them. Unfortunately, you're probably not gonna have golf cart poker runs.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just not going to, it's gonna be, golf carts aren't cheap anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, the days of the $2,000 golf carts are way gone. I mean, way gone. I mean, it's, if a person does have a golf cart, they're probably gonna take some pride in it and not just run amok all over town. I can't compare it to UTVs at all, because I mean,
Well,
you're
and that's why I was
two totally
asking.
different.
Yeah,
You
and
know,
that's what,
it's like a motorcycle versus a moped or even
Yeah.
a electric bicycle. Electric bicycle is a lot of fun, you're gonna go have fun with it, but you're not gonna go to Des Moines with it either,
And I guess that was kind of my question, because, people when they came in and were talking about UTVs, it was like, oh, it's easier to jump in my car and get a couple groceries than, getting in the UTV, not the car. And so I
Sure.
just, I don't have a golf cart, so I was just asking kind of what that looks like.
And Detective McConnell from the Wapello County Sheriff's Department, he was here, and he's my neighbor. And I asked him about Wapello County with Eldon Agency, the surrounding communities, and he said, they've had it for over 10 years in Eldon and Agency, and he said it's been null and void. And he said he's talked to other counties that has it, and he says it's a non-issue with golf carts. I'm not gonna get into the UTV thing, but as far as golf carts go, I mean, as Chief Farrington and I said, one time, if you have trouble with a golf cart, you can probably just get out and chase them and pop them,
Well, and Jerry and Councilperson Galloway, I actually was kind of concerned, and I did some research out on my own, and I talked to a lot of people. What it looks like to me, from my point of view, speaking to all those people, is it was more of a neighborhood thing. They're gonna go to neighbors' houses, or, kind of like a neighborhood thing where they're riding them in their neighborhoods, going to cookouts, going to this. I didn't really get anybody that said they would go to the store. I think I had a few people say, and they actually lived like 2 blocks from a BP. They might run down to BP, or they might, mostly I think it's, for me anyway, it's a recreational, just kind of a recreational.
It's a fun thing.
It's a nice summer, spring, or fall ride.
I'm 2 blocks away from Godfrey's. We'll jump in it, and ride up to Godfrey's and have supper. or
But
you know,
not
like
on
Aaron's
149.
neighbor, not yet. Hopefully soon. Hopefully soon we'll do this. But, I mean, that's usually the point of golf carts is, you know, it's a community thing, it's a neighborhood thing, you know, no, I'm not, you know, I'm not probably gonna ride clear to the south side to go to Hy-Vee to get my, you know, groceries.
The thing that I always get concerned about is whether it's UTVs or golf carts, whatever requirements the city would impose, you're gonna have people that aren't gonna follow it.
Exactly.
You're just gonna not have people follow it. So for me, I always wonder what kind of an enforcement nightmares it's gonna create for our police department. That's what I'm concerned about, whether you're talking UTVs or golf carts, it's something else that they gotta start paying attention to on top of all the stuff they already have to be doing every day. So that's always something I guess I'm kinda concerned about.
Well, before I even presented this 2 weeks ago, I talked to Chief Harrington about an hour about this. And he said, unfortunately, with the UTVs, we've already opened Pandora's box. And he says, you know, a golf cart is pretty calm, obviously,
It
you know,
is.
compared to, you know, a UTV. And he says, you know, he says, yes, I'll give you my blessing on it.
Well, I think what we need to do is the ones that do break the law is hold them accountable and let people know we held them accountable. I mean, I know it might be a pain for a couple of months, but if you get the few who are really breaking the law, maybe that lesson would be learned. And I believe golf carts, this is gonna sound weird, a lot of them people have like a club or a group. They may kind of police themselves, like, hey, don't screw it up for everybody.
Exactly.
You know, don't waste the police department's time, cause it's a waste of time, and don't be doing this, all this other stuff, so.
Any other questions or comments for Jerry?
I think it's a no issue as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you.
I think we ought to just go forward with it when we have a meeting that it can be voted on.
I agree.
Okay, thanks, Jerry.
Okay, and like I said, if anybody wants to after, I'll unload it and we can play.
When Officer Paramenter leaves, can we ride it around on the streets out there?
You can ride around the parking, that's part of it.
Well, you gotta be 16 and have a driver's license.
Let's be with city council permission, you could probably ride it around the parking lot.
Is there anybody else in the audience that would like to speak on this issue tonight?
Did you have anything, Parm?
What's that?
Did you have anything you wanted to say, or?
No, if the council had any questions for me in references, I can answer if you want to. I wasn't privy to any conversations with Chief Farrington that they had together. But no, I can answer any questions, of course, that you would have. It would be my recommendation that, and this is just me, that you keep that age level, at a minimum 18, driver's license, insurance, if that's what you decide to do. There's always concerns with adding other vehicles to the roadways. There's always concerns. And then adding something that is slower than a UTV might represent, or might bring more problems too. If it's now, you can drive them in certain areas where there's more traffic, then, okay, yeah, you maybe want to go to your neighbors down the street. Well, now I'm allowed by law to go ahead and operate it down Main Street, down Jefferson Street, going up the hill, on North Court. I don't know. That's just one of the things that I bring up to all of you.
And the problem with any type of enforcement, whether you're talking about speeding cars or speeding UTVs or speeding golf carts, if they can speed, the problem is always there's never a police officer there when they should be or could be. You have to catch them in the act. So, you know, people complain all the time to me about all these people that are driving 55 miles down a city street. Okay, but you know, unfortunately, there's not a police officer there to catch them in the act, and you have to catch them in the act to be able to give them a ticket, and you can't be all places at all times.
Yes, and to speak to that, I know we've received those complaints and have directed enforcement to those specific areas, so we're putting manpower to sit there at certain times just to try to catch those, you know, whether it be even a individual, you know, like I believe you said, Councilman, it's not everybody.
Right.
You said, Mayor, it's not everybody, maybe one here, one there, one there.
I do agree with the 18 and driver's license, you know, a little bit
Yeah.
older, a little bit.
Our current
Bit
UTV
responsible.
code says, in addition, a person operating a UTV on, golf cart on city streets shall be at least 18 years of age, have financial liability coverage in effect for the vehicle, and carry proof of such financial liability coverage, in addition to the driver's license, so.
And they could have permission to take away something that's registered too, if the violation was either repeated or, you know, strong enough.
So Phil, were you talking about ATVs or golf carts?
What I was reading was what we currently have for utility terrain vehicles, and that talks about 18, minimum of 18 age. I think that's state law actually for those, but we incorporated that. If that is an age that you wanted to have for golf carts, we could mirror language in our code as an additional requirement beyond what state law has, which is, like I said, pretty limited.
Okay, I was under the impression that 16 with a driver's license was for golf carts, but I'll
Well,
have to read
it is, but they're just making the
Yeah,
could put it at 18 to mirror what we have with ATVs to lessen what the police department would have to mirror.
Okay. It's worth discussion.
Okay, well, I will work with the city attorney to draft up language. Unless there's any objection, I'll kind of mirror the Pleasant Hill for now, and if my meetings with council members have you take a look at that. If needed, we'll have another work session. Otherwise, we'll get it to, it won't be next Tuesday, but we'll get it to city council as quick as possible.
Is everybody in agreement with that?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. Okay, those were the only two agenda items on our agenda tonight for our work session, so I appreciate everybody for hanging in there. And at this time, I entertain a motion to adjourn our work session.
So move.
Second?
Chris will take the roll.
Councilmember Hoffman,
Yes.
Councilmember McIntyre,
Yes.
Councilmember Cavanagh.
Yes.
Councilmember Basu,
Yes.
Councilmember Galloway.
Yes.
We are adjourned, and thank you, everybody, for attending our work session this evening.